Hello there, everybody, and welcome back to another Star Wars Lads tier list. Today, we will be ranking the Star Wars canon novels based on your guys' vote. If you've not watched one of our tier lists before, in our community tab, we always put up a week before the tier list comes out the four options that are available for you to vote for the month. This month, narrowly winning out was canon novels over Sith Lords. So Sith Lords, as tradition, will be on next month's tier list as the second place runner up, as well as a couple other new categories. So stay tuned for that poll that will be coming out in December for that month's tier list. But we're going to dive into Star Wars canon novels here. Before we do so, though, please hit that like button down below and subscribe to our channel. We are almost at 1,000 subs. We're less than 30 away. So if you guys are watching this video and you have not subscribed, please do so. It's the best way to show your support for our channel and show us that you like our content and want to see more. Also, stay tuned for our Andor coverage later this week. We will be reviewing Andor every single Wednesday morning. So if you've not checked out our reviews for past episodes, you can go check those out on our channel. And stay tuned for episode 11's review this Wednesday. And then on Friday, we always do predictions and speculations. So if you haven't checked out our predictions and speculation for this coming week's Andor episode 11's prediction speculation is up on the channel and came out last Friday. So let's get into our canon novels. We'll bring in our tiers here. So we have S through D. There's not really any awful canon novels, so no F tier for this, but we did replace it with a haven't read category. As much as we are completionists, we haven't read every single canon novel, but we are going in release order. So we're starting with A New Dawn. And Sanak, why don't you kick us off with A New Dawn?
So the very first book of canon that was released is A New Dawn. I thought this was a very strong opening. It's not necessarily big bombastic adventure. It's very narrowly focused, and it's focused on Hera Syndulla and Kanan Jarrus, who at this time were being introduced. I do like characters like Ray Sloan also being introduced. Overall, I would give it like a top of B, bottom of A.
Yeah, I was gonna say B for me. A New Dawn is like a book with kind of a legacy that's stronger than the actual storytelling. I would say, like, it's not anything memorable, but the introduction of Ray Salone and Count Vidian is what you're here for. Also, the first real look at the dynamic between Hera and Kanan. I'd say B tier. So next we have Tarkin by James Luceno. This book is, I think, kind of underrated nowadays. It's a book that definitely has that typical James Luceno political intrigue where sometimes can be very dialogue heavy, sometimes can be really description heavy. First mention of Palpatine's first name, Sheev, in this. Bottom of A for me, but I think it will be probably towards the bottom by the end of this list.
Yeah, I would give it firmly an A. Characters like Tarkin, who we've explored as a villain, but not necessarily as a person, can thrive. And I mean, his whole background on Iriadu and like what his family has gone through, what it is required of him to have gone through before he joins the Republic. You can understand why he's not just why he's so cold. Easily an A tier. I love what Lucina did to expand that character in a way that the EU had frankly never done. And then our next book is Heir to the Jedi by Kevin Hearn. It's not a great book. It's really not. I would say I enjoyed some of the Luke stuff with him. Have those very first initial forays into like lightsaber construction and how the Force is embedded in that stuff. But maybe I'd give it like a bottom of C.
I have not read this book, so I will trust your judgment. We'll go with C. Moving on to Lords of the Sith. Lords of the Sith is another one of those kind of forgotten, underrated, really good early canon books. This one follows Darth Vader and Palpatine as they're stranded on Ryloth, and Cham Syndulla and his group are trying to assassinate them. But the stuff that's focused on them, when you get their POVs, especially Vader's, and the way Palpatine's testing him continuously and manipulating him, it really, really works. I'm torn between A and B. I think I could put this at the bottom of A, though. I think it's definitely a big step up from A New Dawn.
I would also say bottom of A. I would put it behind Tarkin. I did like getting a little bit more of like the intrigue of like how Rylak politics have evolved. I like seeing some of the imperial perspectives. So yeah, definitely an A tier. Our next book is a personal favorite. It is Dark Disciple by Christy Golden. Automatic S tier. It adapts a planned jumbo 8-episode arc from the Clone Wars. I mean, as far as the adaptations go, this is flawless. It felt like I was reading a Clone Wars show transcript at times, but then there were moments where I was like, "Whoa, this is like genuinely moving and gripping." Like I couldn't remember that I was flipping the pages. It was one of the few books or canon materials really that went past the already expected hype. So again, absolutely love it. Easy S tier.
I agree. Definitely S tier was both in both of our top 10 Star Wars books of all time. The hype around this book, like you said, living up to the expectations of really reintroducing Quinlan Voss into canon, giving him a strong characterization like was present in the old Clone Wars comics before this, and then finishing off Asajj Ventress's story. Wonderful book. Absolutely love it. If you've not read it, definitely check it out. So next we have the one that started it all for most people's favorite canon author. It is Lost Stars by Claudia Gray. This is another great book and one that I think definitely lives up to the hype. It knocks really the whole thing out of the park, gives us some great perspectives from characters that are not part of our major Star Wars cast, introduces new characters. We get to see all the different events from new perspectives. I would put it at the top of A, though. It's not an S for me.
Lost Stars is structurally and by design two characters giving an Imperial and Rebel POV of the major events of the original trilogy. Sure, there are some things before, especially since they both hail from the same planet. It is a top of A book for me because it doesn't necessarily write a major story of its own for the majority of its length until the very end, where we get a little bit more about the Battle of Jakku. Our next book is Aftermath. Legacy wise, I think Aftermath has fared better than I expected it to be. The best parts of the book for many of us were the interludes, but the story itself of the first Aftermath book is not that enthralling. And I do enjoy the crew, but the biggest turnoff for me, and still is the writing style that Chuck Wendig employed. I want to give this a bottom of B. It's definitely better than An Heir to the Jedi.
Okay, I was actually going to say D because it's by far my least favorite book out of all these that I've read. I want to echo pretty much everything you said. I enjoy the characters. The next two do way more for the characters than this one does, though. Those really enhance them. That disappointment will never fade for most of us who read this when it came out, and for me, it's easily my least favorite Star Wars book I've read in canon. The next book on our list is Battlefront: Twilight Company by Alexander Freed. I've actually not read this one either, so I will pass this over to Sanak for his thoughts on Twilight Company.
Yeah, I think when we think about Battlefront Twilight Company, it also kind of has that same flaw that Aftermath did. Unfortunately, it's such a bland book. I for the life of me, I can barely remember this book. It was a tie-in for tie-in's sake, and there wasn't anything interesting enough other than the past first 30 pages where it explains the setup for the story. So for me, honestly, it is a C tier. I would put it in the middle between Aftermath and Heir to the Jedi or something. The next book is The Force Awakens novelization by Alan Dean Foster. And I myself have not read any novelization, so I will pass this over to Liam.
The Force Awakens novelization was something that, I picked up immediately when it came out because I was so obsessed with Force Awakens when it came out. However, it doesn't really change anything or add anything to the story. One of the biggest things that it does add is retconned, which is Rey and Poe meeting, which is retconned by The Last Jedi. By and large, it does give us a few extra things, but most of them are things we can consume in the film format if we wanted to watch deleted scenes. So for me, I would probably drop this at the top of C. Not that it's a bad book, but I think when we're talking about novelizations in general, we kind of have to be particular about what does it actually add because this is not the intended format to consume this. But next, we get the pleasure of talking about I'll just spoil it right now, my favorite canon book. If you've seen our top 10 Star Wars books, we both have this in there as well. I love Bloodline, read it immediately when it came out. For me, it's Claudia Gray's best work. And the way she's able to understand Leia, it's here that she really grapples with a Leia in flux, a Leia trying to deal with the system that she's fought so hard to bring into fruition, now starting to fail, just like the previous system before her. It's a Leia that has to grapple with dealing with people on the other side of the political party as her, which is, a nice message about unity. I really, really love this book. It's one of my favorite Star Wars books of all time. Easy S tier.
Agreed. I mean, I can echo a lot of the same things. Certainly the best look into Star Wars politics that we've ever gotten. Amazing book. I love her fan casting too of Ransom as Tom Hiddleston. Our next book is Aftermath Life Debt, also by Chuck Wendig. The biggest plot point is focused on rescuing Chewbacca's family and freeing and liberating Kashyyyk. I do remember going through it so quickly because I was actually like devouring this book in comparison to Aftermath, and the plot was fun, and I was just going through it. And again, the interludes were always fun to explore. I would honestly say this is my favorite of the trilogy. Honestly, fight for a bottom of A, but if not, top of B.
I was gonna say B. Life Debt was one that drastically improves the storytelling because it's not as plotting as the first one. The writing still for me weighed it down a bit. It didn't move as fast of a clip to me as Empire's End, at least because it doesn't have as significant of an impact. So for me, I would put it in B.
Yeah, I
Are
can
you-
agree with that.
our next book is the subject of many controversies currently, Ahsoka by E.K. Johnston. It's up into the air whether this book is still strictly canon or not been retconned. There's no direct scenes in this that are completely changed from the book to Tales of the Jedi, but there are plenty of scenes in this, including the ending, that are kind of the same thing that happens in Tales of the Jedi. But if we're just looking at the book itself, I think this is another good young adult book. I enjoy this. It's a very fast paced book, it's very short. I wouldn't say it's as exciting to me or beloved by me personally as something like Tarkin or Lost Stars. So I don't know if I'd drop it in A, but I would do either bottom of A or top of B. I think it is still a really solid book.
I've only read chunks of the story. I've never read the whole story in one sitting. It deals with things that should have been in the Clone Wars show. They should have the Siege of Mandalore. In this book, it's such a minor footnote, but it is still a relatively detailed plot of Ahsoka chasing down Maul, who calls her Lady Tano. We get to see in the book she has a green lightsabers. They're blue in the show. It does tie in quite nicely with her whole fulcrum storyline in Star Wars Rebels. It's tough because I like the chunks of it that are there. I think most media has done those chunks better elsewhere. So it's a tough book. I'll defer to you wherever you want to put it.
I would still say B. The writing's simple because it isn't a young adult novel. I feel like it's more streamlined and simple, but there is still a lot to really like here. Because I mean, even the Clone Wars stuff is really just the interlude at the beginning. It's like the prologue, and there's chapters from Obi-Wan's point of view. There's a lot of some really
Yeah.
interesting stuff in here that I still really like.
All right, and then let's go on to Catalyst, a Rogue One novel by James Luceno. I have not read this book.
This book's fantastic. I think this is one of James Luceno's best books in general, but also it's his best canon book easily. Got such great intrigue with the political parts of the Death Star. Tarkin is fantastic here. Is one of the reasons why I feel like if most people who read this kind of knew Tarkin was going to be in the movie, you get way more Krennic. Such great founding of the relationship between Krennic and Galen and Lyra Ursula. I was really sad when Lyra was killed at the beginning of Rogue One because she's such a great character here. Out of any of these books, this one enhances a movie more than every single book on here. So I'm gonna say top of A. All right, so finally we have the last Aftermath book, Aftermath Empire's End. I alluded to this earlier. This is my favorite of the trilogy. I think mainly because even though Chuck Wendig's writing is still here, where he's still doing the same types of things, although I do think he improves throughout the trilogy at writing Star Wars. His pace is better here. His language is a little better. This one has the story we were waiting for. This is the Battle of Jakku. This is all of final pieces of the Empire making their last stand. And I think it works quite well. I'm still like on that bubble to where I do think most of the things we have in A tier are better. So I would be completely fine with it at the top of B, but I do like it better than everything we else have in B. So I'm on that bubble. So I'll let you be the deciding factor here.
Well, I think I'll push for bottom of A. I just missed some of that initial dynamic that was really, really fostered well in Life Debt, but kind of became come and go. At least the way I was reading Life Empire's End for me, it felt like there were scenes that they were just there, but not having them talking or saying anything because the plot was obviously more important. And we got a lot of stuff with the early New Republic in this book that I really did appreciate with the politics and the structure there. So I'll say bottom of it for sure. Thrawn, the canon novel by Timothy Zahn. I want to say A. The Rise of Thrawn in this is great. I really love all that stuff. You could really see his thinking. But what I think my favorite part of this whole book and favorite part of canon Thrawn is the introduction of Eli Vanto. I think him being kind of like a caretaker character for our Thrawn and then essentially become his protege afterwards was like a very nice way for like a reader to kind of fit and see how would Thrawn treat the average Star Wars person. So easy A.
I would say easy A as well. Personally, I'd probably put this in front of Lost Stars and behind Catalyst. It captures the Thrawn from the Legends material because this was our initial transition into canon very well. I was going to mention Eli Vanto as well. He's a fantastic character, and they do such a great job turning him into a similar figure as a Pelion, but also giving us reasons why somebody like this would want to follow Thrawn, where Pelion in Legends is so kind of obsessed and it thinks of him as this just kind of like indomitable figure. And Vanto here has more of a friendship with Thrawn. And this book really explores the racism that's always been in the Empire, the fact that there are no aliens in the Empire at all besides Thrawn has always been a big thing in Legends, and this explores it really well. Yeah, definitely A tier. Love this book. So next we have Leia, Princess of Alderaan. This book is good. This is a Claudia Gray book, and I would say it might be my least favorite Claudia Gray book. Not to really take away from the writing or the storytelling here, it's all still really good. It does give a nice narrative about how Leia discovers her family is working with the rebellion. What this book does well is establish that kind of like we see Mon Mothma currently in Andor doing, Leia is aware of all the problems in the galaxy. She wants to change them through the system, but this book helps her grapple with that she can't do that. She can't change it through the system. She has to take that next step. I really like what's done here. I would definitely put this in B, but I do think it's my least favorite Claudia Gray book.
The next book that we have is Phasma by Delilah S. Dawson. Also not a book that I've read.
Yeah, this is definitely the thing that is most interesting about Phasma. It's a book that, despite the cover and despite what you would think is not about Phasma really at all in the First Order itself, this is an origin story for Phasma. Also, some great introductions to characters like Vi Marati, who is a big part of the Galaxy's Edge theme park, if you've ever been there, as well as Commander Cardinal, who also becomes a really strong character in this novel. This book's violent, it's brutal, it's quite entertaining. It's a good read. Very, very different from anything you'll read in Star Wars, at least canon wise. It's very Mad Maxian. I'd probably put it right here towards the top of B. So next we have The Last Jedi novelization by Jason Fry. The Last Jedi novelization is to me the best novelization of a sequel film, even from the opening prologue where you get some stuff from Luke's perspective. It adds a lot to the character of Luke just by giving his POV, giving a bit more into his head. But I'd probably put this one in B. I think this is a really, really good novelization.
Moving on to another book that I have not read, the second of the unofficial first Thrawn trilogy in canon.
For me, this book is the weakest of Zahn's Thrawn trilogy, his unofficial Thrawn trilogy that takes place during the original trilogy timeline. However, I still think it's an extremely strong book. I really dig the Thrawn and Vader stuff, even though that is probably the least like exciting part. That's definitely the more exciting narrative is Anakin and Thrawn. One of the other things that's really important about this book is that it does kind of give way to our initial intrigue about the Grisks, which are kind of what a lot of people are expecting to be our Yuzon Vong stand-ins. I would definitely say this is probably a bottom of A tier for me. Next is, so we're finally switching the trend of books that you haven't read to books that I have not read. I've not gotten into Queen's Shadow. I actually read the first chapter, but I don't think that's enough to really rank it for me, so I'll pass it over to you.
Yeah, I think Queen's Shadow is a fine book. I know a lot of people love it, but Queen's Shadow is very strong for what it sets out to do. It does set out to tell the story of Padme transitioning from being a queen to being a senator. Sabe becomes a full-on second protagonist in this book. I mean, it is the first book that was released, and I really did appreciate that we got to see a lot of follow-up with the Tatooine stuff that was playing out in the Phantom Menace about slavery and all that. I think I could see this as a top of B, mid B book. I definitely stronger than Ahsoka. Our next book is Master and Apprentice by Claudia Gray. Excellent book. I honestly think this is one of my more favorite Claudia Gray books that I've ever read. But really, it is a dynamic of Qui-Gon and Obi-Wan that's so good here, and an Obi-Wan who is still young enough to question his master and take it too far. Is that I love a lot of the prophecy stuff that draws Qui-Gon into his own view of the Force, into what he follows, the cosmic Force and all that, with his former master's first apprentice. I liked having a Jedi who wasn't exactly following people's codes either, and kind of just mourning parts of himself, but also just living recklessly. I would push for a bottom of S, but I can also see top of A.
Yeah, and here's where we're gonna have to discuss how many we want in S tier because I definitely have one that I know you haven't read that I want in, in S, and I know we're not gonna be able to separate Light of the Jedi and The Rising Storm. So I'm actually okay with putting 7 books in this S tier because we also know one other one that's definitely going to end up in our S tier. Yeah, I'll go with you with the bottom of S. I do think for me, I would say I like Catalyst a little bit more, and it's close between this and Thrawn, but it's definitely towards the top of my A to where I'm fine with it in S tier. So next we have Alphabet Squadron. I've dived into the first book and I can safely say that I think this book is quite good. I understand a lot of the criticisms that people have had and I kind of have similar criticisms. This book is written kind of a bit distantly. It's very military, which is such a unique tone for canon especially. I think this book's quite good. Now I've heard that Victory's Price especially and Shadowfall are significantly better. So I think with that in mind, I would probably put this one in towards the middle to bottom of B.
I think now we can look into a final Thrawn titled Thrawn Treason, again by Timothy Zahn. Have not read it, so passing it back to you, Liam.
Thrawn Treason is really good. This one actually rivals the first book for me. I think because that book goes so closely into his characterization and who he is and who Eli Vanto is. Kind of depends what you like. Do you like origin stories that span over many years, who cover a different, large variety of plots for our characters? Or do you like a book like this, which takes place in about a week and has a lot of big events take place in about a week, where Thrawn just disappears from the final season of Rebels, and that this is what he's doing the whole time? But this book is still excellent. Does introduce Pelion to canon very briefly. Here we get Admiral Aralani also as a major character here rather than just kind of an epilogue of Thrawn. For me personally, I would put it right behind the first Thrawn book. I think it's fantastic. Next, we have our first audio drama that we're going to be talking about here. It's Dooku Jedi Lost, a book that's been coming up a lot more lately with Tales of the Jedi coming out. And I also think this book is really great. This is the best audio drama we've gotten so far, in my opinion. Covers a large variety of time. I think that is my only criticism with Dooku Jedi Lost. Personally, still really love this. I think it does a great job with all its characters, even Ventress and her encountering the ghost of her old master and like that haunting uh, vision in her head of her Jedi master taunting her and telling her what to do. This whole book, all of it's fantastic, and the voice cast is phenomenal. I would say I actually definitely think I like it better than Lords of the Sith and Empire's End. So I would probably say bottom of A for me.
Okay, yeah, I can also go with bottom of A. I loved Asajj being haunted. I loved her kind of seeking out this mysterious figure for her potential master and all that and what she had to do. I love how Dooku kind of opening up his entire life to some degree to or at least a version of his life to Asajj to justify kind of who he's become and all these things was very cool. So yeah, definitely bottom of A. And our next book is Resistance Reborn by Rebecca Roanhorse. And I have not read this book, so I'm passing it over to you, Liam.
This was one of my most anticipated books for sure that I've read in canon, and I was actually a little disappointed with how safe this book is. I feel like I should have known that it was going to be safe because it was one of those Journey 2 books, which usually don't really add that much. Resistance Reborn was a book that does a really nice job of unifying canon. We get Shriv and most of our characters from Battlefront 2 in here. We get characters from all over comics, books, video games, movies, TV. But the mission here and the kind of the plot, I guess it's one of the things I've always had a problem with the timeline between Last Jedi and The Rise of Skywalker. I feel like it should have been a bit more time than 1 year. This story just feels kind of uneventful and kind of like just another attempt to have the Resistance recruit allies. I would put it probably at the bottom of B. Now we'll move on to the Rise of Skywalker novelization, the expanded edition of Rise of Skywalker, which adds more than The Force Awakens, I would say. This is kind of brief for a novelization, especially of a pretty decently long film, and a film that definitely needed the backstory added to it. I think the stuff that is given here is nice and works quite well, but there's always, that inkling of there could have been more. There could have been more added here that definitely would have fleshed stuff out. Because of the problems I have with the Rise of Skywalker in general, I would probably say top of C for me.
I think we can move on to a book that I have actually read, and I don't think you've read, and it's Queen's Peril by E.K. Johnston. The first chunk is really good. For me personally, it satisfied like this long-standing itch that I've had with what the whole idea of like the handmaidens was. How did it come together? Very cool to see young teenage girls and showcase their skills and abilities. The dynamic fostered between all of them is lovely. And then the movie stuff begins and the Trade Federation is just thrown into the story and then things just happen. Like it's not even like you get a chapter of a POV of stuff happening. It's just lines. It's a tough book to grade because of that, because if it was all written like it was for the first 3/4 of the story, I think it's honestly A tier. It is really that good. Because it's not written like that and its structure is just so abrupt and weird at the end, and it's only saved by some of the handmaidens POV, it's a middle to bottom B for me.
Well, the next book we have to talk about here is Thrawn Ascendancy Chaos Rising by Timothy Zahn, the first in the Ascendancy trilogy. I think this book is great. It starts out the whole Chiss Ascendancy trilogy quite well, has really the heavy-handed task of introducing the entire Chiss hierarchy and the way the ruling family and the class structure works, and the naming conventions of the Chiss. Like there's a lot of like really dense and meaty material, but I'm a fan of Darth Plagueis. This is the type of stuff I really, really dig is like really world building in Star Wars. The Thrawn Ascendancy trilogy does this the best of arguably any Star Wars book since like Heirs to the Empire, because it is creating an entirely new world. Like it's stuff so foreign for us Star Wars fans that it doesn't even really feel like Star Wars at times. I can't say that I like it more than Thrawn or Thrawn Treason, but I would I know I'm lining up all the Thrawn books here, but they're all really great. They are. They truly are. I would say I'd put it right behind Thrawn Treason. I think it's a fantastic book.
Then we're gonna go to a books that we definitely have both read. The High Republic, Light of the Jedi by Charles Soule S. I mean, it was such a wonderful start to an era that I think we were all cautiously optimistic for, but we didn't realize just how amazing it would turn out in Phase One. All the Jedi are wondrous and full of life. They are what we thought the prequel Jedi would be. The Nile are such good villains, and honestly, they get the most service here than they do in the rest of the books. How they act, what they think like, all that stuff is amazing. And obviously, Mark Yonro, as we talked over and over on this channel, is top 5 Star Wars villain at this point. He has become that good. Easy S tier. What do you think, Liam?
Yeah, this is my favorite of the High Republic books. And if you've seen any of our High Republic coverage, you know that this is my favorite and Sunix is the Rising Storm. But they're like right next to each other. It just slightly depends on what your taste is. Love this book. Definitely an S tier for me as well. So next we have Into the Dark, which was Claudia Gray's first High Republic book. This is her only young adult book in the High Republic so far. And Into the Dark is one of the better Star Wars High Republic novels in Phase 1, and by far the best young adult book in my opinion. I put this one in A. For me, it would be towards the bottom of A, and introduces our characters that we got throughout a lot of these young adult books, and kind of characters that are better than most of what we got in later young adult books in Phase 1.
I have to strongly agree, especially with that placement. I think the biggest thing about this is that we get a lot of like the strong, meaty stuff for the Drengir here and essentially nowhere else. If the story was built off the same way and with the same weight, if this was just going to be the starting point, the Drengir could have easily rivaled the Nile, could have been a force for even the Nile to deal with, which would have made the story of the High Republic case one way more complicated. And of course, I love the vessel's crew. Yeah, Leax Gyasi, who's essentially been fan casted by Claudia Gray herself as Matthew McConaughey. The star of this whole story is Geode, of course, but in all seriousness, it is a great book. Then our next book is Thrawn Ascendancy, Greater Good by Timothy Zahn, the second of the Thrawn Ascendancy trilogy. Again, I've not read it, so I'll pass it over to you, Liam.
Greater Good is probably my least favorite canon Thrawn book. That being said, I would still put it in A tier. It's a really good book. It does have that kind of middle chapter syndrome sometimes where things get a little stagnant. It tries to plot a lot of new characters, some stuff that really pays off in Lesser Evil. So I would say after reading Lesser Evil, it redeems a lot of my criticisms I had with this book initially. Thrawn is absent for a lot of this book, as I mentioned. The emphasis is put on building out the members of the Chiss Ascendancy after kind of start using Thrawn to start the intrigue for the rest of this world in the first book. So for me, I would probably put this right here in the towards the bottom of A. I do think it's better than Lords of the Sith and Empire's End, but it is my least favorite Thrawn canon book. So now we have Rising Storm. Talked about it a little bit earlier. The Rising Storm is a fantastic book. For me, definitely S tier. It's got the action and the stakes ramped up from Light of the Jedi. It definitely adds those layers to this book. I think for me, the Light of the Jedi is slightly tighter package that I enjoyed a bit more. I also enjoy the setting up of the world rather than the continuation of the world. This is still a fantastic book. All the stuff at the Republic Fair is so incredible, and it this book flies by. This is one of the best paced Star Wars books I've read in canon. So good, definitely S tier.
Yeah, I think that's why I, for the most part, have it slightly edge out Light of the Jedi. For me, I always do prefer sequels to be a little darker, a little bit more intense, and this is definitely fitting that criteria. The Republic Fair and that story was very cool to see. The action there is just it's a blitz. Like you can't avoid it. It comes at you and you're just devouring each page. We lose Avar for the most part in this story, but we do get a lot more of Elzar and Stellan. And Stellan, having it just focused on the Nile and what they're going to do next, and the Jedi and the Republic and what they're trying to do to prevent the massacre that inevitably happens wasn't. I felt that kept the story going at a very nice pace, kept it a lot more character focused than just plot happening. So yeah, it is my favorite. I think the placement of it ahead of the Light of Jedi, behind the Light of the Jedi, it doesn't really matter. It's a 1A, 1B, easy S tier.
I think we had Light of the Jedi ahead of Rising Storm in our High Republic tier list. So in this one, I will give Rising Storm ahead of Light of the Jedi.
I'll take that and run with it. Our next book is The High Republic Out of the Shadows by Justina Ireland. It's not bad. I will repeat this on and on and on that for how long the story is, it only deals with a chunk of something that feels a lot more serious than it should have been another book filled, even if it's another YA book. But the story that we do have here sometimes just freezes, especially all the stuff about Coruscant. It's a glacial pace. Reed Silas, I love the kid, but he's just fawning and not doing much. Sylvester Yarrow, yeah. She feels like an Affy Hollow clone, and there's nothing new about her. They're both in the same sort of guild connection, both flying these vessels out. I don't know. It's almost a C tier for me, but I maybe it's a bottom of B. I don't know. What's your take here?
I was gonna say C tier. I think this is easily my least favorite High Republic book, at least of the ones we're ranking here, not including the junior books. This book, like you said, the middle part of this thing just goes to a screeching halt. The ending, while it kind of redeems it because it is a nice, action-packed, cool ending with some solid stakes for Vernestra, especially, is made to almost feel like it doesn't matter, especially with phase one. Really never references it again. And then, especially with Reith being sidelined, who is given a much bigger role in Midnight Horizon and obviously is our main character in Into the Dark and Comac. Those characters, the momentum of their story basically being just put on hold for this book never sat well with me. I think the new characters aren't really interesting enough, in my opinion, to really warrant much interest in this, and it's kind of out of all of the not adult and young adult books in the High Republic phase one. This is kind of the one that you can skip, honestly. Like it doesn't introduce much and it doesn't change much for most of our characters. I would say C for me.
Yeah, I think that's fair. Yeah.
So next we have Tempest Runner, which was our audio drama for the High Republic Phase 1. Tempest Runner does a really good job of giving backstory to Lorna D, our main Tempest Runner from the rest of the High Republic books, The Rising Storm, and Light of the Jedi. And I think this does a really solid job. Like Dooku Jedi Lost, it does a solid job of providing backstory while also giving us nice internal looks at our characters. That's something that gives her a bit more flesh than rather than just like cool Twilight character. It's not one of my favorite High Republic books, so I would probably say towards the bottom of B, middle bottom of B.
Yeah, I think middle, bottom B also fits for me. It's a fun breakdown, quite literally, of Lorna D being stripped away of who she's become with the Nile. Yeah, all that stuff happens, but then she comes back even more, doubling down on Lorna D. There's not much in the story that you need to know. It does feel very forgettable in that sense, plot wise, like Out of the Shadows. And there's some things that just happen at the very end that I'm like, oh, okay, I feel like this should be expanded on a little bit more in a missing book that would have combined and connected quite well with Out of the Shadows, but it's not there. So I'm fine with the bottom of B. All right, so our next book is Thrawn Ascendancy, Lesser Evil, the final book of the trilogy, again by Timothy Zahn. Again, I haven't read it.
Thrawn is definitely a deep dive for sure, and this is my favorite Thrawn book in canon. I think this book does a fantastic job of capturing both Thrawn and the world that Zahn has built here. The world he's really started back in Legends and then kind of culminating with the freedom to be able to write this in canon. And it does such a nice job of introducing Thrawn to the point to where he is in the first Thrawn book, where he's discovered. All of it's so good. I would definitely put this as an S tier. It's one of the reasons why I love this trilogy so much is all three of those books are so neatly tied together. They build so well off each other. Zahn just has a mastery of trilogy writing. Personally, I'd put it in front of Master and Apprentice, but I know you haven't read that, so I'm fine with it anywhere here in S tier.
Yeah, I'm fine with it ahead. Yeah.
Next, we have The Fallen Star, which was our final adult novel in the High Republic Phase 1. This one for me is easily my least favorite of the three. Obviously, you can see the other two are in our S tier, so that was probably going to be the case. This one's written by Claudia Gray as well, and I think the writing here, the pace, the tone, the structure, all of it's really good. It's kind of the implications with the rest of the High Republic initiative, which is what brings it down for me. I think the character work here is all really solid as well. But this one, out of almost any book in the High Republic Phase 1, has a tendency to either leave things slightly open ended for other books to finish them off or comics to finish them off, or to just reference stuff that never comes back into the story that is then picked up by comics or books. The ending also to me felt a little flat, especially knowing that we were going to spend the next at least year, maybe more, with a prequel story in High Republic Phase 2. I think it was kind of disappointing. I do really like this book, though. For me, it would be either top B, bottom of A. The writing here is what would push it up towards A for me. The story itself, probably a B for me.
I think that's a very like strong sentiment to have, and for me falls into the whole issue, like you said, of the open-ended stuff. And for me, it's not even open-ended; it's just blatantly cut out. I think there's so many things of this story that should have just had Avar Chris be an active tertiary character. Like there are elements of the story itself that you can be split into different mediums and let those mediums handle it best. A lot of the wordiness, a lot of the dialogue, a lot of like the thought process that should have been in the book. A lot of the action that's leave that for the comic as is. I think that would have worked fine. So that was my biggest issue, and that hurts Claudia Gray because I think she's such a good writer. Because everything else here was great. I do find sometimes the deaths were a little just sort of happened, and like you said, the ending does come off flat, especially after reading Eye of the Storm. Because if that stuff was put into this book, that would have been perfect. But I still really do love this book the more that I think about it. So I'll push for a bottom of A. But now we'll go into the final High Republic Phase 1 book, and that's the young adult novel Midnight Horizon by Daniel Jose Older. I don't know. I really like this book. The pace of it is really great. I love the exploration of Corellia, especially since it connects really well with a lot of the stuff we see in Solo Star Wars Story. Reed Salas does get a lot more due here. Ram Jamorum gets a lot of growth as a character. I liked a lot of like the inner rim politics of denial and how the Republic just kind of doesn't care because it's not affecting them. But then we get stuff like Comac kind of leaving the order and stuff like that just out of the blue for me. I would see it as like a B, somewhere mid B, bottom B.
I would agree. I think Midnight Horizon is like the closest thing in the High Republic so far to that was enjoyable. If you've been reading High Republic Adventures, it's definitely enhanced by that. I think Reith and Comac in general, their story was one of the most disappointing things about phase one of the High Republic because they're so sidelined and out of the shadows, and then they're brought back here, but they're not really working together. Still, though, the pace here is nice. It's a funny book. It's the funniest book in the High Republic for sure. I would probably put it right around where Tempest Runner is. So now we have Brotherhood. This book is fantastic. I've really enjoyed it. I think as character books go in canon, this is one of the best ones. Similar as Master and Apprentice for me, it's really not the plot that's that interesting about this book. The business of Kenny and Moria, it's good. It's okay. By the time we're done with it, it's nice to know what happened. But it's really the connections made here between Obi-Wan and Anakin that raise this book and elevates it to a really high level. Also, Ventress's introduction in here is a nice addition. Really dig this book. I would probably put it towards mid to upper A for me.
Yeah, I fall in the same general area. It is an A for sure. I love this book. It scratched another itch for me, which is how the hell does Anakin go from whiny, who has some serious problems, and then how does Obi-Wan Kenobi, who's a lesser man to some degree in Attack of the Clones, how do they go from that master and apprentice dynamic into brothers? And this book explains it so well. We got to see how the militarization of the Jedi really began at the beginning of the Clone Wars. I actually really love the Padme and Anakin stuff. It shows that they're like both, at least at the very beginning, really equally invested in this relationship and caring about each other. Brotherhood really showcases them having actually grown and actually have real reasons to depend and care for each other. So easy A. And then our next book is, I'm pretty sure, our next S tier book on our list, and that is Shadow of the Sith by Adam Christopher. Dare I say it could be one of the best canon books, not one of the best Star Wars books ever. Middle-aged Luke is so well done here. It feels like a perfect blend of the young optimistic hero and the more wizened, hurt, broken down man that we see in Force Awakens and The Last Jedi before he becomes aware of his flaws and rises above them to teach the next generation. It slots in really well. I love seeing a lot of the episode 9 connections be fleshed out here. That is really the best part about this book for me because it makes 9 so much more enjoyable. I love Rey's parents being fully pushed into full characterizations. And then there's, of course, Ochi. I love this guy in the comics. He's hilarious. And then, of course, all the Sith stuff was great. Excellent Punch Card and Kiza, all that stuff. Absolute S tier.
Yeah, I would agree. It would be my second favorite canon book so far. It does so much to expand the sequel era while still leaving room to grow. Shows the promise of this whole period and the promise of a lot of the story beats that are introduced in Rise of Skywalker, which has always been my favorite part of that movie, was the ideas in it, not the execution. And this shows why some of those ideas were still really great and really interesting. Dathan and Miramir, great characters, great addition to the world. Lando in this book is awesome too. I love seeing kind of a broken Lando. We're so used to Lando always being the guy who's able to put a smile on his face. This does a great job with giving a Lando who's absolutely desperate. And it's really sad, but it's also nice to see Luke and Lando work together. We have not seen that often. It works really well. Echoing all what you say about Luke, fantastic. I love Exum Panchard. I think is one of the most interesting dark side things we've ever introduced. For me, I'd put it as easily my number 2 canon book. All right, so next we have Padawan, the book about teenage Obi-Wan Kenobi going on a little mission here by himself for the first time away from Coruscant. To really kind of stick it to Qui-Gon, prove that he's worthy of being his apprentice. I enjoyed Padawan. I think it is a well-written, solid book. It works for all the levels of what young adult Star Wars books should work pretty solidly in B tier for me. And I think the way Obi-Wan's written as a young person here, it works quite well.
Maybe say bottom would be not because it's a bad book. I just don't think there's anything substantial. And his interactions with the kids on the planet is really cool. I think that's the biggest takeaway is that Obi-Wan's always been that guy. Even in the moments that he doesn't think he is that guy. And I think that's basically why you should read the book if you want to see slightly downtrodden Obi-Wan figured that part out about himself. And moving on, our next book, The Princess and the Scoundrel. It's written by Beth Rivas, and it is about the romance turned wedding of our scoundrel himself, Han Solo, and Princess Leia Organa. It's a hard book for me to place because I enjoy a lot of like the initial stuff because it is an event, and that event is done and portrayed so beautifully. The adventure that she goes with as part of her honeymoon, that is the weakest things about it. It's not great per se. I think the story is written fine. It's just all that adventure stuff and Galactic Star Cruiser stuff is secondary to the event itself, and the event isn't that long. I'd give it a bottom of B.
This book is distinctly 3 acts. There is the act on Endor where they get married, the act on the Galactic Star Cruiser, the Halcyon, and then there's the act where they're on this moon doing the Imperial stuff, which is by far the least interesting because it's the most traditional Star Wars story. Absolutely love the wedding. I thought all of that was fantastic. This book is so funny. Like it really nails the Han dialogue. It really nails the C3PO dialogue, especially their banter. The way Han and Leia are written is fantastic. Plot kind of devolves into something that we've seen a million times before. Middle to bottom B, like maybe like right between Midnight Horizon and Tempest Runner, or right in front of Midnight Horizon. So lastly, we have Path of Deceit, which is the latest High Republic book. It's our first young adult book in the High Republic Phase 2, and I thought this book was great. It has some really great character work, some really strong world building for this time. Marta Rowe is really an interesting character, and I think they've already set her up. Tessa Gratton and Justina Ireland have done such a great job of already setting her up to be a force to be reckoned with and one of the best High Republic characters in this whole series. So for me, this is probably A tier, and I think I would rank it above Into the Dark and Fallen Star personally.
I agree with that fully. As big of a fan as I am of Into the Dark, I think, especially with the implications of what Marta Rowe is going to become, it feels like her story is only going to go up, whereas Into the Dark was kind of the peak for Reith and Comac and the Drengir as a whole. Story itself, I loved it. I loved the Jedis that were introduced, but it's their interactions with Marta and the Path of the Open Hand that is really, it's like a unique and pretty reflective of how different cultures kind of engage here in the real world. And I'm excited for Convergence. We're gonna have our review out the same day it gets released, so be on the lookout for that. But yeah, I'd even push it past Tarkin. That's how good I think it is. But it's really up to you there.
Yeah, I'm good with it past Tarkin. I think it's all right around that same level. I think it's Path of the Seat's great. I'm about halfway into Convergence so far, and I'm digging it quite a bit. It's very different from Path of the Seat, but it is quite good. And like Sanak mentioned, we will be having that review out actually the day before it comes out based on our, our release schedule. That's going to conclude our tier list here. We are probably going to do tier lists like this, like canon novels, and hopefully some of these other ones in the future, maybe once a year, update them with the newer books. We got so much content coming out for you guys, so make sure to check out all of the stuff that is coming out. Like I said, Andor will be coming out every single Wednesday, and our predictions and speculations will be coming out on Friday, so you're not going to want to miss our episode 11 review and our episode 12 predictions and speculation. We also have an interesting idea coming out for you guys with the polls. So make sure you're voting in all these polls. Like I said, you can vote for our tier list poll a week before the new tier list comes out every single month. So we always let you know when that will be available. We post our content calendar out so you can kind of judge when that is going to be coming, that tier list, as well as voting in our Legends Book Club polls. And then currently with these character polls, we have a video plan that's going to be influenced by your votes. So make sure you get those votes in for those polls. So thank you all so much for watching. If you have not yet subscribed, please do so. It's the best way to show your support for our channel and show that you want to see more content from us, and like the video as well. Comment below. Let us know what your favorite canon novels are. Give us maybe your top 5, top 10, or your least favorite. You can rank them all if you want. Let us know down below what your favorites are. We want to interact with you guys, and we always respond to your comments. So thank you so much for watching, and we'll see you next time.